At our 6th anniversary party, my husband stood before 55 guests and said, "You're nothing without me. I always stay our Biddy." Hi, welcome to my channel. I want to share my new story with you.
At our 6-year anniversary party, my husband stood up in front of 35 people and said, "Without me, you'd still be nobody. You're not a real wife and not even worth calling a person. I stayed because I felt sorry for you." The woman he'd been sleeping with at table 6 stood up and looked me in the eyes. He's right. 35 people. Not a single word. I stood up, smiled. "Thank you for the honesty." I placed an envelope in front of him and walked out. The next morning, 47 missed calls. That was the moment he realized. He had just destroyed everything. "Thank you for being here. It genuinely means everything. Tell me in the comments what city or country are you joining from today. Let's see how far this story has traveled." Note some elements of this story are fictional added for depth and purpose. Names and settings are coincidental, but what this story has to say, that part is worth your time. The best anniversary gift I ever received was 6 words. "You were never enough for me." I know how that sounds. I know what you're thinking, that a gift is supposed to be something wrapped in paper, something chosen with care, something that means the person giving it was paying attention to who you are. And you'd be right. A gift is supposed to be all of those things. But sometimes the truth is the only present worth having. And sometimes the person who gives it to you doesn't even know they're doing it. My grandmother used to say that the truth doesn't ask permission, it just arrives. She meant it as a warning brace yourself. Keep your house in order. Don't let anything pile up that you wouldn't want the light to find. I spent most of my adult life taking that saying as a reason to be careful, to manage things, to stay ahead of whatever was coming. What I didn't understand until the night of October 14th was that sometimes the truth arriving isn't a disaster. Sometimes it's just the last thing that needed to happen before you could finally leave. The Cordell is a venue in Nashville's Midtown neighborhood, a restored brick building with high ceilings, warm Edison lighting, and a private event room off the side entrance that holds 40 people comfortably and 35 perfectly. I had booked it 9 months in advance. I had chosen the playlist, confirmed the catering, selected the wine pairings, and positioned every table myself on a hand-drawn floor plan that I still have somewhere in a folder marked October. I am a commercial photographer. Precision is not a personality quirk for me. It is a professional requirement that has over time become indistinguishable from the way I move through the world. By 8:47 that evening, the room was everything I had intended it to be. Soft light, good wine, the kind of low, layered conversation that happens when people are genuinely glad to be somewhere together. 35 guests, every single one of them, chosen deliberately colleagues, old friends, neighbors, people who had shown up for me in ways large and small over the years. I was standing near table 4, holding a glass of Malbec I hadn't touched in 20 minutes when I saw Bram Whitley push back his chair. I want to be precise about what happened next because precision is the only thing I have to offer here. Not drama, not performance, just the sequence of events in the order they occurred. Bram stood. He didn't tap his glass. He didn't ask for the room's attention. He simply stood. And his voice, the voice I had fallen asleep next to for 6 years, cut through the music and the conversation the way a cold draft cuts through a warm room. You don't hear it so much as feel it. 6 years, he said. And you still think throwing a party changes anything. The room didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet in layers, table by table, conversation by conversation, until the only sound left was the playlist still running through the speakers, a song that had no idea what it had walked into. Look at this room. Look at these people. He gestured slowly the way someone does when they want to make sure everyone is watching. They don't see what I see. They don't know that, without me, you'd still be nobody. You have never been enough, Lena. Not as a wife, not as a professional, not as a person. I stayed because I felt sorry for you. And I think it's time everyone in this room understood the truth. 35 people, not one sound. And then from table 6, a woman stood up. Her name was Dessa Holt. She was someone Bram had introduced to me 4 months earlier as a former colleague, someone he ran into occasionally, he'd said, through work. She was wearing a dark green dress and the particular expression of someone who has been waiting for their cue. He's right, you know. She said, her voice smooth and unhurried, her eyes fixed directly on me. Some people simply aren't built for the kind of love that requires them to give something back. She was talking to me, not to the room, to me. And she wanted me to know that she and Bram had discussed this, that this moment right here had been something they had arrived at together. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. It was Cecily Rowe who moved first. Cecily, a photographer I had mentored 2 years ago now, one of my closest friends, scraped her chair back and stood, her gaze moving from Dessa to Bram with the kind of steadiness that takes years to develop. "You brought her here," Cecily said. "Tonight." Not a question, a fact stated plainly for the record. Gene Whitley Bram's father, a quiet man of 61, who had spent most of our marriage looking at his dinner plate during difficult moments, placed one hand on his son's arm. Bram. A single word. Bram did not sit down. Then Vivian Cross crossed the room. Vivian is a senior art director at a firm downtown, someone I have known professionally for 4 years, someone who does not raise her voice because she has never needed to. She stopped 3 feet from Bram and looked at him, the way you look at something you are measuring carefully before deciding what it's worth. "You just told your wife that you don't love her," she said, at her anniversary celebration, in front of 35 people. "And you brought the woman you've been sleeping with to sit at the same table." She paused. "I want to make sure you understand exactly what you've done." I set my glass down. Not because my hands were shaking, they weren't. I set it down because I was done holding it. I had been holding things for a very long time, and I was finished. I looked at Dessa. I looked at Bram. And in the space of 2 seconds, the picture that had been assembling itself in the back of my mind for months clicked into focus. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't rage. This was choreographed, the words, the timing, the woman in the green dress at table 6. All of it designed to land in the one place where I was supposed to be safe. I reached beneath my chair and picked up the envelope I had placed there 2 hours earlier when I arrived to set up the room. It was sealed. It had Bram's name written on the front in my handwriting, neat, unhurried, the same hand I used to label archival prints. I walked to his table and set it in front of him. "Thank you for the honesty," I said. Then I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair, walked to the side entrance, and pushed open the door onto the October night. The air outside was cold and clean, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke from somewhere down the block. Nashville in mid-October has a particular quality to it, something in the way the season turns that makes everything feel like it's making a decision. I did not look back. I had been preparing for 9 months. Everything that needed to be in place was already in place. But to understand why I walked out of that room without a second glance, you need to understand the kind of man I had spent 6 years walking beside. And that story doesn't begin with the worst of him. It begins with the best. The night I walked out of the Cordell, I was not thinking about Bram. I was thinking about October 2018, a museum on a Friday evening, a camera bag bruising my left shoulder, and a room full of people who were not looking at me. That was the version of the story I kept returning to on the drive away from the party. Not the ending, the beginning. Because if you want to understand how a person ends up standing in a crowded room on the 6th anniversary of the night, she said yes, setting her handbag on a table with the same steadiness she would use to set down a lens. You have to start 6 years earlier when she first decided to stay. So let me start there. 6 years before that October night, I chose Bram Whitley. I want to be honest about that because I did choose him. Voluntarily, completely, with both eyes open, or at least I believed so at the time. That part of the fault belongs to me alone. It was a Friday opening at the Frist Art Museum in Nashville. I was not a guest. I had been hired to document the evening sponsors crowd, installation details, and by 8 o'clock I had stopped seeing the art entirely. I was reading the room the way I always read a room when I was working as a series of problems to solve, where the light fell short. Which angle captured the ceiling without flattening the crowd? Whether the woman in the burgundy dress drifting across my frame was a liability or an asset. I was crouched beside a display case adjusting my focal length when a voice said, "I'm in your shot." "You're fine," I said without looking up. "I'm not shooting in that direction." A pause. Then, "What are you shooting?" I straightened. He was watching me with a specific quality of attention, not aggressive, not performative, like someone who had decided to actually listen before speaking. "The light on the north wall," I said. "It's doing something interesting." He turned, studied the wall, then looked back. "I don't see it." "You're not looking through the right frame." "Then show me." His name was Bram Whitley. He asked questions I had never been asked at one of these events, not about the photographs, but about the photographer. What did it feel like to spend an entire evening in a room and be the only person not allowed to simply exist in it? When I looked at a person, did I automatically think about the light? I told him I didn't know how to stop doing it. He said, "That's not a problem. That's just how you're wired." I gave him my card. 3 days later, he used it. The 3 months that followed were the clearest I had experienced with another person. Bram remembered the name of my largest client after I mentioned it once in passing. He remembered that I took my coffee with a single sugar and switched to black under deadline because sweetness felt like something I hadn't earned yet on difficult mornings. He remembered a song I had changed off the radio mid-sentence on our second date and played it again 3 weeks later without commenting, just to see if I would notice. I noticed. I am a person who notices details for a living. To be noticed in return with that level of specificity felt like something I had not realized I was waiting for. We were engaged by January 2019, married by June. I was 26 years old and certain in the way only people who have not yet been seriously wrong about something can be certain. The morning I understood I loved him, not just believed it, but felt it move through me, was an unremarkable Tuesday in early 2019. I was in my studio editing architectural interiors. Awake since before light 3 cold cups of coffee on the desk I kept meaning to finish. Bram opened the door at 9:30. He knew I disliked interruptions when I was color correcting. He did not come in. He stood at the threshold, extended a fresh cup, right temperature, right sugar, not a word about it, and pulled the door closed behind him. I sat with that cup for a long time before I drank it. I thought, this is someone who knows what I need before I name it. I was not wrong that it was rare. I was wrong about what it meant. The change did not announce itself. There was no single morning, no fight that drew a line. Only a series of small adjustments, each one plausible enough that I reorganized myself around it before I noticed the pattern. Month 4 at dinner with his colleagues, I was mid-sentence describing a project when Bram began a separate conversation across the table. Not loudly, simply as though I had finished. I completed the sentence and my head smiled and excused myself to refill my glass. I told myself everyone loses the thread sometimes. Month 8, he asked to review a contract I had not yet signed, the largest commission I had received to that point. His concerns about the exclusivity clause were not entirely wrong, but I had not asked for his review. When I pointed that out, he said he was only trying to protect me. I believed him. I thanked him. Year 2, I realized I could not remember the last time Bram had asked about my work without a secondary observation attached, that I seemed tired, that a client sounded difficult, that a project I was excited about seemed like more trouble than it was worth. No announcement, no argument. One afternoon, I noticed I had not told him about a new account I had landed, and then I noticed more quietly that I hadn't wanted to. I spent 2 years after that trying to return to the man I thought he was for those first 3 months. I made myself smaller in the ways that reduced friction. I stopped mentioning contracts before they were signed. I told myself this was what long-term love required: accommodation adjustment, the slow work of fitting 2 lives together. What I understand now is that the man from October 2018 was not someone I had failed to hold on to. He was a performance. Precise patient. Timed exactly to the window when I was most likely to believe it. The coffee at the right temperature. The song. The questions no one else had thought to ask. All of it accurate. None of it true. The man I chose and the man I married were not the same person. Understanding that cost me 4 more years. But before I tell you about those years, I want to show you what a Monday morning in our house in Germantown looked like. Because nothing that came after nothing. I planned nothing, I signed. Nothing I set down on a table at the Cordell makes sense without it. A Monday morning in our house in Germantown started the same way every Monday morning. Started with me awake before 6. And the particular silence of a house that expects everything from you before it bothers to say good morning. The clocks in that house ran on 2 different schedules. Mine started in the dark. His started when the coffee was already made. I was up at 5:50. I did not use an alarm. I had stopped needing one somewhere in the 2nd year of marriage. When my body decided that waiting for the day to begin was less exhausting than being startled into it. I went to the kitchen in the gray January light, filled the kettle. And while it heated, I opened my phone and scrolled through both of our calendars. His had 3 items: a site visit at 10, lunch at 1, a call at 3:30. Mine had 6. I noted the gap in his afternoon and thought briefly that I should remind him about the registration renewal on his car insurance before he left the house. Then I thought, I will just handle it. That was how most of my decisions started in those days, not with intention, with the quiet arithmetic of it being easier to do a thing than to explain why it needed doing. I made 2 cups of coffee. I set his on the counter where he would see it. I took mine to the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and pulled up the insurance company's automated renewal line before the kettle had finished cooling. The hold music was jazz. A short loop, I timed it at 45 seconds before it repeated. I know because by the 3rd cycle, I had started counting without meaning to, the way you count ceiling tiles in a waiting room when there is nothing else to do with your hands. I was on hold for 34 minutes. In that 34 minutes, I answered 3 client emails, one confirming a product shoot scheduled for Thursday, one rescheduling a commercial session that had been moved twice already, one addressing a question about licensing terms that I had answered for this particular client before and would likely answer again. I opened the dental office's online portal and booked Bram's 6-month cleaning for a Tuesday in February because his last reminder had gone unanswered and the slot would close by end of week. I transferred $240 to the utility account for the electricity bill, which was due on Wednesday. The insurance representative picked up at 6:34. The renewal took 4 minutes. She confirmed the updated policy would be emailed within the hour. I set my phone down. My coffee was on the table in front of me. I had not taken a sip. Bram came downstairs at 8. I heard him before I saw him. The specific rhythm of his footsteps unhurried. The sound of someone who had slept without interruption and expected to continue the morning in the same way. He went directly to the counter, picked up his cup, and drank. He looked out the kitchen window at the Germantown street below a dog walker, a delivery truck idling at the corner. The ordinary machinery of a Tuesday-adjacent morning doing its work. "Where are my keys?" he said. "Hook by the door," I said. "Left side." He checked. He found them. He came back to finish the coffee, standing at the counter, phone in his other hand, thumb moving. He did not ask how I had slept. He did not ask what I had on that day. At 8:11, he said, "I'll probably be late, don't wait on dinner," and walked out. The door closed with the particular sound of a door that has been closed the same way 10,000 times. I sat at the kitchen table. The January light had shifted while I wasn't paying attention. It was coming through the east window now at the angle I knew meant I had about 40 minutes before it would be good for the product shoot I had set up in the studio. I looked at my coffee cup. I wrapped both hands around it. It was cold. The text came in at 9:23. "Did you call the insurance people? Registration's expired?" I looked at the message for a moment. I thought about the 45-second jazz loop. I thought about the dental appointment now confirmed in his calendar, the utility transfer, the 3 client emails, the 4 minutes with the representative at 6:34 in the morning. I typed yes, done at 6:30. Confirmation email is in your inbox. I set the phone face down on the table. He did not reply. I opened my work calendar and looked at the day in front of me. 3 shoots, 2 client meetings, 1 at noon, 1 at 4. An editing deadline for a hospitality account by end of business Friday that I had been chipping away at in the margins of every other task this week. All of it mine, none of it containing his name. And yet my day had begun with his car insurance, his keys, his coffee still warm, waiting on the counter. I was looking at the calendar when a notification pushed through from a scheduling app I had downloaded the previous spring and mostly forgotten about. A small banner at the top of the screen. 9 months until your anniversary. Would you like to plan an event? I stared at it. Outside the window, Nashville was doing what Nashville does on a Monday in January, moving indifferent, self-sufficient, entirely unaware of the woman at the kitchen table with cold coffee and a calendar full of other people's needs. I tapped the notification. Yes. I set the phone down. I looked at the coffee cup. I did not drink it. I left it on the table, pushed back my chair, and went to get my camera ready for the light. That was the first decision I made that year that had nothing to do with Bram Whitley. I did not know yet how many more I would have to make. That evening, I called Rue Flanagan, my closest friend, the one person who had learned to read the things I did not say out loud, and I told her I wanted to mark the anniversary. Not ours, mine. She asked me what kind. I said mine. I called Rue Flanagan that evening from the studio, sitting on the floor between 2 light stands, phone on speaker, a glass of wine I kept forgetting to drink balanced on the edge of the equipment case beside me. I had stayed later than I needed to. The editing deadline was not until Friday, and I had already done enough for 1 day. But going home felt like a second shift, and I was not ready for it yet. Rue Flanagan had been my closest friend for 8 years. We had met in a workshop neither of us had particularly wanted to attend, discovered we had adjacent but different approaches to the same problem of paying attention, and had been talking ever since. She had a gift I have never been able to fully explain, an inability to pretend that something was fine when it was not in a confrontational way. More like a person who genuinely could not locate the part of the brain that generates polite fictions. She simply saw what was in front of her and said so, and she did it with enough warmth that it never felt like an accusation. That was one of the things I loved most about her. "How was today?" she asked. I told her. I went through it in order up at 5:50, the 2 calendars the insurance hold 45 seconds of jazz, repeating on a loop 34 minutes before a human being picked up. The dental appointment booked, the utility transfer, 3 client emails, Bram's coffee on the counter, his keys on the hook, the door closing at 8:11. The text at 9:23, "Did you call the insurance people?" My reply, his silence. I told her all of it in the tone I would use to walk a client through a shoot schedule, sequentially, without emphasis, the facts in the order they had occurred. When I finished, Rue was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone thinking of what to say, The quiet of someone who has already understood and is deciding how much of the understanding to offer. "Okay," she said finally. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Do you know that thing where you keep trying to pour from a cup that's been empty for a long time?" "I know the thing." At some point, she said, "You stop even checking whether there's anything in it. You just keep going through the motion because you don't know how to stop. Because stopping would mean admitting the cup has been empty for longer than you want to count." I did not say anything. "I'm not telling you what to do," Rue said. "I'm just saying I've been watching you go through that motion for a while now." I looked around the studio while she talked. The two light stands I was sitting between, I had spent 20 minutes adjusting their angles that morning before the product shoot. The seamless paper backdrop along the east wall, a particular shade of warm white I had ordered, specifically because the cool white it replaced had been washing out the texture of the surfaces I was shooting. The reflector cards propped against the window, positioned for the north light that I had learned over years of working in this room, would shift 4 degrees to the left by 9:30 on a clear January morning. I knew every surface in this room. I knew what every element would do when I moved it. I knew what the light would look like before I turned it on. Nobody in this room had ever asked me where the car keys were. I set an anniversary reminder today, I said. "That's not what I'm talking about," Rue said. "I know, but it's related." Another pause. Shorter this time. "What kind of party are you thinking?" "Mine," I said. "Not ours, mine." Rue did not ask me to elaborate. She had known me long enough to understand that the difference between those two words was not a detail, it was the entire point. She simply said, "Okay," as in the way she said okay when she meant "I am with you, keep going." "I want 35 people there," I said, "for the anniversary, not the one he thinks we're celebrating, the one I'm closing. My people. People I chose, not people we ended up with. And I need them to witness something." "Witness what?" I looked at the wine glass on the edge of the equipment case. The studio lights were warm and directed the kind of light I set up deliberately, the kind that showed exactly what I wanted it to show and nothing else. "I'm not sure yet," I said, "but I'll know soon." Rue was quiet again. This time, it was the quiet of someone who has decided to trust that you will fill in the rest when you are ready. "Then we plan it," she said. "What's the date?" "October 14th, 6 years to the night we met. That's 9 months away." "I know," I said. "I need every one of them." I picked up the wine glass after I hung up. The wine had been sitting for almost an hour poured when I first came in left while I set up the call forgotten through the conversation. I held it for a moment. It was still the right temperature, not cold yet, still where I wanted it. I drank it. It was a small thing. One sip of wine at the right moment in a room I controlled on a night when I had decided something. But I noticed it the way I noticed details in a photograph that other people walked past. The way I had been trained, or had trained myself to see what was actually there. I had been leaving cups to go cold for a long time. I put the glass down, reached for my notebook, and opened it to a new page. Rue did not ask me what I meant by witness something. She already understood the weight behind the words. What she did not know, what I had not told anyone yet, was that the party was only one piece of what I was beginning to build. The other pieces would take longer to explain. To understand them, you need to understand 3 dinners. To understand Bram Whitley, you have to understand his family's dinner table. Not because anything dramatic happened there, but because nothing ever did, and that was precisely the problem. Jean and Gloria Whitley lived in a craftsman house on the east side of Nashville, 20 minutes from Germantown, in a neighborhood where the driveways were swept and the mailboxes matched, and the dinner hour was observed with a kind of consistency that signals either deep contentment or a mutual agreement not to look too closely at things. I had eaten at that table more times than I could count. I knew which chair wobbled slightly on the left rear leg. I knew that Gloria always served the bread before the salad, and that Jean poured the wine exactly once at the beginning and did not offer again. I knew the particular silence that settled over the table whenever a subject arrived that no one had decided how to handle yet. I knew that silence very well. I had been the subject more than once. The first dinner was 2 years ago. We were midway through the main course when I mentioned a new commercial campaign. I'd been developing a series of brand identity photographs for a mid-size hospitality company that had approached me directly. It was the kind of account I had been working toward for 2 years, a long-term relationship creative latitude, a client who wanted a point of view rather than just coverage. I was describing the concept when Bram set down his fork. "The idea's good," he said, "but the execution plan's a little scattered." He turned to his parents. "She tends to start with the aesthetics before she's locked down the logistics. We've been working on it." He said it the way a mentor describes a promising student, patient, even fond. Jean nodded twice the way he nodded when he had registered something and filed it away. Gloria smiled and reached for the water pitcher. "It's wonderful that you two work so well together," she said, and refilled my glass without asking whether I wanted more. I looked at my salad plate. I had finished the salad 20 minutes ago. It was still in front of me because no one had cleared it yet and I had not moved it. And I was thinking about the word scattered and what it meant that Bram had used it at this particular table in front of these particular people. I ate the rest of my meal. I changed the subject to something easier. I drove home and did not say anything about it because what would I have said? He had not been cruel. He had simply described me in front of his family as someone who needed guidance and then continued eating as though he had said something helpful. The second dinner was 14 months ago. I had news, real news, the kind I had been working toward since before Bram and I were married. A major commercial publication based in Nashville had selected me as the lead photographer for a brand campaign valued at $52,000. It was the largest single contract of my career at that point. I had been holding it for 3 days before I told anyone, turning it over in my mind the way you turn over something you are not sure you are allowed to keep. I told them at the table between the bread and the salad because that was when the conversation had a natural pause. And I thought, this is the moment. Bram put his fork down slowly. He looked at me with the expression he used when he was about to say something he considered valuable. "That's significant," he said. "Just make sure it doesn't become your whole identity. Clients can sense that kind of fixation. It makes them uncomfortable." Gloria set her own fork down and nodded gently. "Bram's right, sweetheart. Balance is everything. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket at this stage." Jean looked at his plate. I picked up my water glass and took a long sip. The water was cold. The room was warm. I thought about the 3 days I had spent not telling anyone, about the specific weight of good news that you carry alone because you are not sure how it will land. I thought about the word fixation and the phrase at this stage and what those words meant about the ceiling that had just been quietly lowered over my head. "The weather's supposed to turn this weekend," I said. "Jean, are you still planning to refinish the back deck?" Jean looked up. "Probably push it to spring." We talked about the deck for the rest of the meal. The third dinner was 8 months ago. I had been thinking about expanding the studio a second space, a part-time assistant, the infrastructure, to take on more than one major account at a time. I had run the numbers. I had looked at available commercial rentals in the 12 South area. I had not made any decisions, but I had done the research, and I was ready to think out loud about it with people who might have useful perspectives. I mentioned it during the main course, casually, as a possibility I was considering. Bram reached for his wine. "That's ambitious," he said. "Maybe a little ahead of where you actually are right now." Jean set his fork down. "Bram's got a point, sweetheart. No need to rush these things." Gloria stood and began collecting the plates, though not everyone had finished. She moved around the table efficiently, The way she always moved when a conversation had reached the point where she preferred to be in motion rather than seated. I watched her take my plate. I drove home alone that night. Bram had stayed to help Jean with something in the garage, and I pulled into our driveway and sat in the car in the dark. I counted 47 seconds before I went inside. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard and counted. I had started doing that at some point, measuring the gap between arriving somewhere and being able to face what was inside. Looking back at those 3 dinners now, what strikes me is not the cruelty. There was no cruelty. Bram never told me I was not talented. He acknowledged my instincts, noted my potential, expressed what sounded like confidence in my future, and that I have come to understand was the entire architecture of it. You cannot restrain something you do not believe is worth restraining. He saw exactly what I was capable of. That was why he was so careful about how far I was allowed to go. The night I sat in the garage counting seconds was the night I stopped counting seconds and started counting something else entirely, the distance between who I was and who I was still capable of becoming, if I stopped asking for permission. I want to tell you about a Wednesday afternoon in July, about a woman named Camille Ashford and a $67,000 contract. About the afternoon, I finally understood that what Bram feared most was not my failure. It was my success. The studio on 12 South had north-facing windows. The light came in flat, and even it did not shift. The way south-facing light shifts did not create shadows where you did not want them, did not change its character between 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. I had chosen that space for exactly that reason. In photography, predictable light is not a limitation. It is a foundation. You build everything else around what you can trust to stay the same. What I had not accounted for was Bram walking through the door on a Wednesday afternoon in July. Camille Ashford had been referred to me 2 years earlier by a friend of a friend for a small editorial project that turned into a recurring commercial account. In the time since, she had sent me 2 additional clients, a boutique hotel group and a regional food brand, both of whom had become steady work. Camille was the kind of client that other clients come from. She operated at a level where her recommendation carried specific weight, and she knew it, and she used that weight carefully. When she reached out in June about a lifestyle brand campaign, I understood what it meant. 4 months of work, full creative direction, a contract valued at $67,000. It was not just the largest commission I had been offered. It was entry into a market I had been working toward for the better part of 3 years, brands with national reach, campaigns with real distribution, the kind of work that changes what the next client thinks they can ask of you. We had been meeting for 40 minutes when I heard the door. Bram did not knock. He opened the door the way a person opens a door to a room they consider available to them and stepped inside, with the particular ease of someone who has never had to consider whether his arrival might be poorly timed. "I was in the neighborhood," he said. "Thought I'd stop by." Camille looked up. I stood. "I'm with a client," I said. My voice was level. I had learned to keep it level. "I won't be a minute." He glanced around the studio, the lighting setup I had spent an hour calibrating that morning. The portfolio prints arranged across the display board in a sequence I had tested twice before Camille arrived. The mood boards pinned along the east wall. He pulled out the chair in the far corner, the one I used for overflow equipment, and sat down. I looked at Camille. She looked at me. She smiled the way people smile when they are being gracious about something they did not sign up for. I returned to the presentation. I had made it through approximately 2 sentences when Bram spoke. "She tends to oversaturate the warm tones," he said. He was addressing Camille, not me, as though I were not standing 4 feet away holding my own portfolio. "It's something she's been working on. Her eye is good, the technical side is still catching up." The room had a particular quality of silence after he said it, not the silence of shock. The silence of a situation that has become something other than what it was supposed to be and is waiting for someone to decide what to do next. Camille nodded. She was gracious. She was professional. She asked one more question about the project timeline, listened to my answer, checked her phone once, and then said that she needed to revisit her internal schedule and would follow up soon. She was out the door 7 minutes later. The email arrived 2 days after that. I read it at my desk in the studio in the same north-facing light that had been flat and reliable all morning. Hi, Lena. I've decided to go in a different direction for this project. Thank you for your time and for the thoughtful presentation. I wish you all the best. $67,000. Gone. I sat with the email for a full hour, not because of the money, though the money was real and the loss of it would require adjustments I had not planned for. I sat with it because of the specific nature of what had just happened, the precision of it, the clarity. Bram had not come to the studio to destroy anything. He had come because he was nearby and had not thought to check whether I was in the middle of something that mattered. He had offered his opinion on my work because offering his opinion on my work was something he did in the same way he breathed, without calculation or intent. He had sat in my chair and addressed my client in my space and described my limitations to a woman whose trust I had spent 2 years building. And then he had driven away and had probably stopped for coffee and had probably not thought about it again. The destruction was not the goal. It simply followed him the way a shadow follows a person in direct light. It did not need to be intentional to be complete. That was the thing I had not been able to name before. I had spent months cataloging the weight of small moments, the interrupted sentences, the unsolicited reviews, the table where nothing dramatic ever happened. I had understood intellectually that something was wrong. But understanding a thing intellectually and being able to hold it in your hands as evidence are two different operations. The email from Camille Ashford was evidence. I called Rue that night. I told her about the email, about the 7 minutes, about the phrase technical side still catching up. I did not cry. I described it the way I would describe a photograph with a problem in the composition. Here is what is missing. Here is the negative space. Here is the shape of what should have been there. I need 35 people at the anniversary. I said when I had finished. My people. And I need them to witness something. Witness what Rue asked. Whatever happens when I stop trying to manage the situation and let it be what it is. Rue was quiet for a moment. Are you ready for that? Not yet, I said. But I will be. I have 3 months. That was July. The party was October. 3 months, and I intended to use every one of them. What I did not tell Rue that night, what I had not told anyone, was that 3 weeks before Camille Ashford walked out of my studio, I had found something on Bram's phone. I had not been looking for anything. I had picked it up to check the time when mine was charging across the room and the screen had not locked yet. And what I saw in the space of 4 seconds rearranged every assumption I had made about what I thought I understood about my marriage. I had been wrong about the nature of what I was dealing with. I had not been wrong about needing to leave. Before I reveal what I found that Wednesday afternoon comment the word "still here," so I know you're with me, because what comes next changes everything you thought you knew about this marriage. Quick note. What follows contains fictional elements shaped for storytelling purposes. If that's not for you, this is a good place to step away. But if you're staying, you won't regret it. I want to be precise about what I found and what I chose to do with it, because the order of those two things matters more than either one alone. There are things you notice before you know you are noticing them. A particular rhythm to someone's phone uses the angle of the screen, the speed at which it gets turned face down when you walk into the room, the pauses in a conversation that used to not have pauses, the way a person's attention travels somewhere else for just a fraction of a second when a name comes up that should not require any travel at all. I had been noticing these things for months. I had not named what I was noticing because naming something requires you to decide what to do with it, and I was not ready. That is not weakness. That is the particular calculus of a person who has learned that once you say a thing out loud, you cannot unsay it, and you had better be ready for what happens after. I was not ready until I was. It was a Sunday evening in June. Bram was in the shower, his phone was on the kitchen counter charging, and mine was across the room, and I picked his up to check the time. The screen had not locked yet. I want to be accurate. I was not looking for anything. I picked it up, the screen was open, and what was already visible in those 4 seconds did not require interpretation. It was not ambiguous. It was not something I could have explained away even if I had wanted to. I placed the phone back on the counter, face down in the same position I had found it. I went to the living room, sat down on the couch, and waited for Bram to come downstairs. He came down 20 minutes later, checked his phone, put it in his pocket, and asked if I wanted to order dinner. I said yes. I said I was thinking Thai. He said that sounded fine. We ate dinner. We watched something on television. I went to bed when I said I was going to bed. I did not say anything. Not because I was afraid. I want to be clear about that. I did not stay quiet because I was afraid of him, or afraid of the fight, or afraid of what the truth would cost me. I stayed quiet because I understood in the 30 seconds between setting down his phone and walking to the living room that saying something that night would hand Bram exactly what he would need to control the shape of what happened next. He would apologize or explain or escalate, and any of those outcomes would put me in a position of reacting rather than deciding. And I was done reacting to things in that house. What I had now was better than a confrontation. I had information, and I had time. The next morning, while Bram was at his site visit, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and my phone and made a call I had been thinking about for longer than I had admitted to myself. A family law attorney with an office in Midtown Nashville. The receptionist asked if I was calling for an initial consultation. I said yes. She offered me a slot that Thursday at noon. I took it. I hung up and opened the small notebook I kept in my bag, not the studio notebook, a different one, a daily planner I carried everywhere. I turned to a fresh page and wrote 2 words at the top, next steps. Below that, I wrote 3 items numbered in the same handwriting I used for shoot schedules and client timelines. Deliberate, legible, actionable. Then I closed the planner, finished my coffee while it was still warm, and went to work. I had met Dessa Holt 4 months before that Sunday in June at a commercial real estate mixer that Bram had brought me to on a Thursday evening in February. She was in commercial property consulting or development, I had not registered which. Bram had introduced her as someone he knew from years back, a former colleague he occasionally crossed paths with in the industry. She and I had shaken hands. She had complimented my work when Bram mentioned what I did. I had thanked her. The conversation had lasted perhaps 4 minutes before we moved on to other people in the room. I had not thought about her again until June. When I checked the event sign-in sheet, the mixer had been a ticketed industry event, and I had kept the program in my bag out of habit. Her name was listed under the sponsoring organization. I already knew her last name from what I had seen on Bram's phone. I confirmed the spelling. That was all I needed. 3 weeks later, when I finalized the guest list for October, I added her name. Not because I wanted a confrontation. I want to be precise about this, too. I was not building a trap. I was building a room, a specific room with specific people in it, in which the truth would not need my help to be visible. Dessa Holt would be in that room as herself. Bram would be in that room as himself. 35 people I had chosen carefully would be in that room as witnesses. I was not going to manufacture anything. I was simply going to stop preventing things from being seen. I looked at her name on the list. I underlined it once with a straight edge. I closed the planner. Then I went outside with my camera because the afternoon light on the street in front of the house had reached the angle I had been watching for all week, and I had work to do. That was June. In July, Bram walked into my studio and a $67,000 contract walked out. I did not tell Rue about June when I called her in July. I was not ready for that conversation yet, and I understood by then that some things need to stay in your own hands until you have decided exactly what to do with them. The moment you say something out loud, it belongs to the room. I was not ready to give that away. In August, an email arrived that I almost missed. And in September, I did not tell anyone what I was building because the moment you tell someone, it stops being only yours. Some things need to remain yours right up until the moment you are ready to let the whole room see them. The email from Harlow & Associates arrived on a Wednesday morning in late August, routed into the secondary folder my work account used for correspondence that was not from an existing client. I almost missed it entirely. I found it at lunch, a turkey sandwich I had made at 6:45 that morning, because I had been trying in small and deliberate ways to make more choices that were entirely my own. I read it once. I put the phone face down on the studio table. I finished the sandwich. Then I picked the phone up and read it 3 more times. Harlow & Associates was a commercial photography studio operating out of the Rhino Art District in Denver, Colorado River North, a neighborhood built around industrial spaces converted into galleries, studios, and creative firms. The kind of place where the architecture still remembered what it used to be and had decided that was an asset rather than a liability. They were looking for a lead photographer on an exclusive 3-year contract. The compensation was 45% above what I was currently earning. There was a relocation package. The start date was January 1st. The person who had recommended me was a creative director I had met briefly at the Salient Gallery opening in 2020. She had stood in front of photograph 11 for 4 minutes without moving, and I had noticed, because I noticed those things and we had exchanged cards afterward. And I had not thought much about it until her name appeared in the second paragraph of this email as the reason Harlow & Associates had found my portfolio. I sat with that for a moment. 4 years. A 4-minute pause in front of a single photograph. The specific, unhurried way that the right things move toward you when you are not looking directly at them. I read the email a 4th time. Then I closed my laptop and went back to work because there was a client session in 40 minutes, and I had learned that the best way to think through something large was to keep doing the smaller things correctly in the meantime. On Saturday, I drove to the coffee shop on 12th Avenue with my laptop and a legal pad and opened every rental listing I could find in the Rhino district. I was not browsing. I had already decided if I am honest, sometime between the 3rd and 4th reading of that email on Wednesday, which is why I had eaten the rest of the sandwich so carefully. The way you finish a meal when you know something has shifted and you want to stay steady until you have thought it through. The apartment on Larimer Street appeared 40 minutes into the search. Studio unit, 2nd floor, north-facing windows, available December 1st. The listing photograph showed the morning light coming in flat and even across the wood floor, the same quality of light I had built my studio in Nashville around. The light that does not change its character between 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, the light you can trust. I called the number in the listing. The landlord picked up on the 3rd ring. I asked 3 questions: lease terms, pet policy, since I did not have a pet, but wanted to know the kind of landlord who would be asked and whether the north light held through winter. She answered all 3 without hedging. I put down a deposit before I hung up. On Monday, I wrote back to Harlow & Associates and accepted the position. On Tuesday, I sat across from my attorney, Ellen Marsh Family Law, Midtown Nashville. The same woman I had first called on a Monday morning in June while Bram was at a site visit, and we finished what we had been building since that first Thursday appointment. The divorce filing was complete. The The motion for temporary restraining order was prepared ready to be submitted to Davidson County Circuit Court on October 12th, 2 days before the party. I want to explain what the TRO was and was not because precision matters here. Under Tennessee law, when a divorce petition is filed, the court can issue injunctive relief restricting both parties from transferring, concealing, or disposing of marital assets during the proceedings. The motion we had prepared would freeze the joint accounts checking savings and the investment account Bram managed, but that carried both our names effective upon service. A Davidson County process server would deliver the filing to Bram directly. Once served, any attempt to move funds from those accounts would constitute contempt of court, a violation with immediate legal consequences. Ellen explained this the way she explained everything in plain language without drama, looking at me directly. I took notes. I asked 2 follow-up questions. I thanked her and paid the invoice at the front desk on my way out. That evening, I opened the planner to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote a single word, next. Below it, in the same handwriting I used for shoot schedules, I wrote 3 lines. The Larimer Street address, Ellen Marsh's name, and the filing date. The start date in Denver. I closed the planner and put it in my bag. Then I called Rue. I told her about Denver. First, the studio, the contract, the 45%. The north-facing windows on Larimer Street that looked like the ones I had built my career inside for the past 4 years. I told her I had already accepted. The line was quiet for a moment. You signed the lease before you told me, she said. I needed to think. You needed to sign a lease to think, that too. Another pause, shorter. Lena, are you okay? I looked at the planner on the table in front of me, the page with 3 lines on it, the word next at the top. Through the studio window, the Nashville evening was doing what it always did, moving. Indifferent, entirely unaware. I think I'm more than okay, I said. I'm just not used to what this feels like yet. I had spent 6 years making every significant decision inside the question of how Bram Whitley would respond to it. This was the first time in 6 years I had made a decision all the way to its end without stopping to ask what he would think. It did not feel like freedom yet. It felt like standing at the edge of something very wide and realizing with something close to surprise that your legs are steadier than you expected. The party at the Cordell was confirmed for October 14th. Bram believed he was attending an anniversary celebration. He did not know he was walking toward an ending. Neither did I. Fully not until 4 days before it happened, when he found something that was not meant for him to find, and everything that had been moving quietly beneath the surface came up into the light. I sent Bram his invitation the same way I sent everyone else's by text message, with the venue name and the time and nothing additional, the Cordell. October 14th, 7 o'clock. He called me 40 minutes later. That was the first of 3 calls. The first call came on a Tuesday evening in late September, 3 weeks before the party. I should know who's going to be there, he said. His tone was the one he used when he was framing a preference as a reasonable request. Conversational, almost casual. You'll meet everyone that night, I said. I just want to make sure they're the right people for you. They are, I said, for me. A pause. Brief. The kind that meant he had registered something but had decided not to press it yet. Of course, he said. That makes sense. We said goodbye. I hung up and opened my planner to the page I had started keeping for this specifically. I wrote 3 words in the margin. Call 1 redirected. The second call came 10 days before the party. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was between client sessions eating an apple at my desk when his name appeared on the screen. I've been thinking, he said. I should probably say something, a few words. Families do that at these things. This isn't that kind of party. What kind of anniversary celebration doesn't have a few words from the husband? Mine, I said. The silence that followed was longer than the one from the first call. Not angry, something more careful than anger. He was listening to the word mine in a way that suggested he had heard it differently this time. "Of course," he said after a moment, "I understand." He did not understand, but he said it and I let him say it and I wrote in the margin when I hung up. Call 2 redirected. Tone beginning to shift. The third call came 6 days before. A Saturday morning while I was reviewing a lighting setup for a session scheduled that afternoon. "I know a florist on Gallatin Road," Bram said. "They do excellent work. It would add a personal touch, something the venue can't provide. The venue is handling the flowers. It's your anniversary. It should feel personal." "It will," I said. "I'm the one who planned it." "Right." A sound in his voice I had learned to identify over 6 years, not agreement, not acceptance, but the particular quality of a person recalculating while giving nothing away. "Of course." I put the phone down and wrote the third note, call 3 redirected. He knows something is different. 4 days before the party was a Thursday. Bram came home earlier than usual. I did not know that at the time because I was in the studio where I spent most of my days. What I know now and what I pieced together later is what the house looked like at 4:15 that afternoon. I had left my planner on the kitchen counter. Not carelessly, I had set it down when I went to answer the door for a delivery, and the delivery required a signature and a brief exchange about the package dimensions, and by the time I came back inside, 11 minutes had passed. The planner was where I had left it. The page I had been working from was visible the way a page is visible when you have not thought about closing it because you were only going to be gone for a moment. Bram did not mention the planner when I saw him that evening. He did not mention Denver. He did not mention Ellen Marsh's name, which appeared at the top of that page, or the Larimer Street address below it, or the line near the bottom, the one that read simply TRO, effective October 15th. What he did was cancel his plans for the evening. A client emergency, he said something that had come up unexpectedly. He left the house at 7 and did not return until 11. I noted the change and said nothing. This was not new behavior, the unexplained absences, the closed-off evenings. What was new was the quality of the silence when he came home. He moved through the kitchen without turning on the overhead light. He checked his phone twice in the space of 3 minutes. He went upstairs without saying goodnight. I sat at the kitchen table for a while after I heard his door close. Looking back at those 3 calls now, I understand what they were, not curiosity about an anniversary celebration, not involvement, not even the ordinary interest a spouse might have in a shared occasion. They were reconnaissance. Each question was a different version of the same question. How much control do I have here? And each time I answered mine, he heard it land somewhere it had not landed before. He was afraid. That was the architecture of all 3 calls: fear, dressed in the only clothes it knew how to wear around me. And when the fear found something concrete to attach itself to, something written in black ink on a planner page on a kitchen counter, it did what fear does when it is also strategic. It made arrangements. What those arrangements were, I did not fully understand until the morning after the party, when the pieces that had been moving quietly in the dark came into the light and held still long enough for me to see them clearly. The night before the party, I packed 1 box, just 1. Equipment I would not need for the next 2 weeks, a few books. Some things from the studio shelves I had stopped seeing because they had been in the same place for so long. I carried it to the car and set it in the trunk. Standing in the driveway in the October dark, I looked back at the house. The light was on in the upstairs hallway, the one that stayed on because the switch had always been slightly misaligned and neither of us had ever fixed it. For the first time in a long time, it felt like a place I was leaving rather than a place I lived. The night before October 14th, I packed a box. Just 1 studio equipment I would not need for the next several weeks. wrapped in packing paper and fitted into a cardboard box I had kept from the last time I ordered paper stock from my supplier. I had set it by the front door earlier and then come back inside, and now I was standing in the kitchen of the Germantown house, looking at the room the way you look at a place when you have already decided to leave it. Bram was out. A client dinner he had said that morning with the particular casualness of someone who has learned to produce explanations in advance. I did not ask which client. I had stopped asking those questions some time ago, not out of indifference, but because I already knew the shape of the answer, and knowing was enough. The kitchen looked the way it always looked at this hour, clean ordered. The overhead light on because the pendant over the island did not reach the back counter, and I had never gotten around to adding another lamp. The coffee maker was set for 6:45. The dish rack held 2 plates and a single mug, all of them mine. Bram had eaten out for the past 3 nights. I moved through the room slowly, not with nostalgia. I want to be careful about that word because nostalgia implies a wish that things had been different. And I was not wishing for anything by then. I was looking the way I looked at a location before a shoot, cataloging what was there, noting what I would not need to take, understanding the light. The living room, a couch we had chosen together from a showroom on Charlotte Avenue in the first year of our marriage, when we still made decisions as a unit. The bookshelves I had painted the summer Bram was traveling for work because I had wanted something to do with my hands that produced a visible result. The lamp in the corner that had a shade slightly too small for its base, I had noticed it the first week and had not replaced it, and now I was not going to. Everything had a place. Most of those places I had decided. Bram would need to learn where things were. My phone vibrated on the counter at 8:43. A text from Ellen Marsh, my attorney. TRO served at 2:47 p.m. today. Bram Whitley has been officially notified. All filings are in order. I'll see you on the other side. I read the message twice. I set the phone face up on the counter. I wanted to be able to see it without having to pick it up again. I stood there for a moment with both hands flat on the counter and the kitchen quiet around me. Temporary restraining order served at 2:47 in the afternoon. That meant that at some point during the day, while I had been running a product session at the studio, while I had been editing the last of the hospitality account photographs, while I had been driving home through the October dark, a Davidson County process server had located Bram and placed the paperwork in his hands. He had signed for it, or he had not. But either way, he had been notified. The order was real. The accounts would be restricted by October 15th. He knew. By now he had known for hours. I thought about that for a moment. I thought about what a person like Bram does with 36 hours, and the knowledge that the accounts he considered accessible are about to become inaccessible. I filed the thought carefully the way I filed information I was not yet ready to use. I would reply to Ellen in the morning. I had done my part. I made tea. A simple thing, water heat the small ritual of something warm in a quiet house. I did not finish it. I carried it to the sofa and sat looking out the front window at the Germantown street, the old maple on the corner, that had been losing leaves since mid-September, a neighbor's porch light left on. The ordinary landscape of a Sunday night in October that did not know it was the last Sunday night I would spend in this house. My grandmother had a saying she returned to when things were uncertain, not a proverb exactly, more a way of orienting herself when she could not see clearly ahead. She said that sometimes the best thing you could do for the truth was to prepare the room for it before it arrived, not to arrange what the truth would say, simply to make sure you were standing on solid ground when it walked in. I had been preparing the room for 9 months. The lease on Larimer Street, the accepted position at Harlow and Associates, Ellen's filings now complete, the guest list of 35 people I had chosen carefully, the envelope I had left with Ellen's office that would be delivered to the Cordell on the evening of October 14th, to be placed on the table at the seat I had reserved under my name. The room was ready. At 10:15, I turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs. I thought briefly about the things that could go wrong the next day, not because I was afraid of them, but because I had spent 9 months thinking about them methodically, and the habit was not easy to set down all at once. I named 3 possibilities. For each one, I knew what the next step would be. That was all I needed. I set my alarm for 7. I closed my eyes. Everything that needed doing had been done. The lease was signed. The contract was accepted. Ellen had filed everything that needed filing. The TRO was in Bram's hands. There was nothing left to prepare. There was only what would happen next, and what would happen next was no longer mine to arrange. I slept for 8 hours without interruption, not because I was fearless, because I had nothing left to be afraid of. I arrived at the Cordell at 6 o'clock on the evening of October 14th, 2024. The party was not until 7. I am a commercial photographer. Arriving an hour early to any space I am about to work in is not a decision I make. It is a reflex. The same way framing a shot is a reflex. The same way reading the light before I touch the camera is a reflex. It is what I do before I do anything else. I came in through the side entrance on the adjacent street, the same door I had used when I walked the space 2 months earlier, on a Tuesday afternoon in August when the room was empty and the chairs were stacked and the north wall caught the afternoon light in exactly the way I had hoped it would. The venue coordinator had left the main room open for me. The overhead lights were on at 70% warm, amber not bright enough to flatten the depth of the room, not dim enough to make the space feel smaller than it was. The playlist I had submitted the previous week was running softly, something instrumental, no lyrics, the kind of sound that holds a room together without asking for attention. I walked the perimeter first, 7 tables, 35 chairs. I checked each placement against the layout I had confirmed with the coordinator 3 days earlier. Table 4 was centered in the room, angled slightly toward the entrance I had asked for that specifically. My seat at table 4 faced the door directly. It was where I always positioned myself in any room I needed to understand fully, with a clear sight line to every entrance, every exit, every person who walked in. Table 7 was in the far corner nearest the east wall, partially behind a structural column. It had 5 seats. I had assigned it to Bram Jean and Gloria Whitley, and 2 of their family acquaintances who had asked to be included. It was a good table. It simply was not a central one. I stood in the middle of the room for a moment after I finished checking. The music moved quietly through the space. Outside, Nashville was doing what it did on October evenings, cooling off, slowing down, settling into the particular quality of autumn dark that makes everything look slightly more deliberate than it is. This was mine. I had built it from nothing confirmed, every detail chosen, every chair. It was the first thing I had built entirely for myself in 6 years, and standing in the middle of it, I did not feel triumphant. I felt more than anything like a person who had finally arrived somewhere after a very long drive, tired in a way that was not unpleasant, ready in a way that had nothing left to prove. Thad Gorman arrived at 7 o'clock, exactly punctual enough that I had to smile, because Thad had been reliably on time to every event I had ever invited him to, and I had never once told him how much I appreciated that. He was a former client turned friend, a graphic designer who had hired me for a brand campaign 3 years earlier and had sent me a handwritten note after the project closed saying the photographs had been the best decision he'd made that year. Otto Brannigan arrived at 7:04 in a blazer I had never seen before. Dark navy pressed with a small boutonniere I suspected his daughter had talked him into. He was 67 years old and had lived next door to the Germantown house since before we moved in. And in 6 years, he had brought us vegetables from his garden in summer and cleared our front walk in the 2 winters that had produced actual snow and had never once asked for anything in return. He handed me a card and a bottle of wine and said, as he always said when he saw me, exactly what was on his mind. "Your place has been quiet this week," he said. "The house, I mean. Usually I hear you in the mornings." "I've been a little occupied." "I figured," he said. He looked at me for a moment the way old people sometimes look at you when they know more than they are going to say, and then he moved toward the bar and let me be. Cecily Rowe and Juniper Hale came in together at 7:10. Cecily was a photographer I had mentored 2 years earlier. She had since built her own practice, and what had started as a professional relationship had become a genuine friendship. Direct observant, not someone who said things she did not mean. Juniper worked in nonprofit development and had the particular quality of paying full attention to whoever she was talking to, which was rarer than it should have been. Vivienne Cross arrived at 7:15 with her husband. I had worked with Vivienne at a commercial studio for 8 months before I went independent, and she had been the first person to tell me plainly that my work was strong enough to stand on its own. She said it once and did not repeat it, which was how I knew she meant it. I watched her scan the room when she came in the same instinct I had, the instinct of someone who reads spaces before she enters them fully, and I saw her locate me and nod. Brief. Enough. Rue came in at 7:15 as well, slightly behind Vivienne, and made her way directly to me at the bar. "You okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She nodded. That was all. Rue had learned years ago that when I said yes in that particular tone, I meant it, and the most useful thing she could do was believe me and stand close. I noticed Dessa Holt arrive at 7:18 from across the room. She came in with a woman I did not know, a colleague, from the look of it, and moved toward the left side of the space near the windows. She did not look for me. She did not know that I had any reason to look for her. I watched her for the space of 2 seconds and then returned my attention to the room. Bram arrived at 7:22 with Jean and Gloria behind him. He was wearing the charcoal suit, the one he reserved for occasions he considered worth dressing for. He came through the main entrance the way he always entered a room he expected to matter in. Shoulders back, a half-second pause at the threshold, a gaze that moved across the space with what looked like ease but was in fact reconnaissance. He was looking for familiar faces. He was looking for someone to anchor himself to. He was looking for the version of this room where he was at its center. He did not find it. The room was full of 35 people who knew me, my work, my history, the thing I had built over 6 years that had nothing to do with his name on a lease or his opinion on a contract. He was the husband. In this room tonight, that was a single fact among many and not the most interesting one. I watched him from table 4 as he processed this. His smile adjusted a fraction of a degree the way a camera adjusts when the light reading comes back different than expected. He was recalibrating. He did it smoothly. He had years of practice. For the next hour, I moved between tables a few minutes with Thad, a longer exchange with Cecily about a project she had just closed. A moment with Otto, who had found the corner of the bar and seemed content to remain there with his wine. I kept my sightline clear. At table 7, I watched Bram work through the room from his position near the east wall, a conversation with Jean, an attempted exchange with a couple at the adjacent table that went politely but briefly. A check of his phone at 8:12 that he covered quickly when he noticed Gloria watching. At 8:30, the room had reached the particular temperature of a party that is working the noise level a steady, warm register. The kind of sound that builds when people are genuinely glad to be in the same place. Laughter from the left side of the room near the windows. Cecily and Juniper in deep conversation with Vivienne's husband. Thad at the bar with 2 people I had introduced him to, specifically because I thought they would have things to talk about. And they did. I stood at the edge of table 4 and looked at Bram Whitley sitting at table 7 with his jacket still buttoned. His wine barely touched his eyes, doing another slow pass around the room. And I thought none of this has anything to do with him, not one piece of it. At 8:47, in my peripheral vision, I saw Bram push back his chair. My hands, which had been holding a wine glass, went still. Not rigid still. The way a room goes still in the half second before something that cannot be taken back moves into the air. I had been watching him without watching him all evening, the particular skill of a person trained to read a room without appearing to read it. I had seen him check his phone at 8:12 and cover it quickly when Gloria glanced over. I had seen him check it again at 8:30, this time with a stillness that was different from his earlier stillness, not casual concealment, but the particular quality of a person who's just received information they were not prepared for. He had set the phone face down on the table. He had not touched his wine. He had been sitting with that information for 17 minutes when he pushed his chair back and stood. He did not tap a glass. He did not ask for attention. He simply stood and the room gave it to him the way rooms give attention to a disturbance, not willingly, but inevitably. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be loud. There are voices that cut across space not through volume, but through certainty, and Bram's was one of them. 6 years, he said, and she still thinks throwing a party changes anything. The playlist kept running, a soft instrumental track moving through the room the way background music moves when the room has stopped listening to it. Look at this room. Look at these people. He gestured once a single unhurried motion across the space. They don't see what I see. They don't know that without me, she would be nothing. She's never been enough, Lena. Not as a wife, not as a professional, not as a person. A pause, one breath deliberately held. I stayed because I felt sorry for her, and I think it is time that everyone in this room knew the truth. I counted the silence after he finished. It lasted 4 seconds, the longest 4 seconds in that room all evening. Dessa Holt stood up from table 6. I had placed her there specifically 2 tables from mine in the sight line I had designed my seat to cover. She rose with the particular ease of someone who had decided in advance that she had standing to speak. Her voice was quiet and precise, the kind of quiet that carries because it has no uncertainty in it. She knows what I mean, Dessa said. She was not speaking to Bram. She was looking directly at me. Some people simply aren't made for the kind of love that requires them to put in the work. The room took a moment to understand what it had just heard. Cecily Rowe understood first. She stood from table 3. I heard the chair before I saw her move. The specific scrape of a chair pushed back by someone who has made a decision and is no longer interested in remaining seated for it. She looked from Dessa to Bram. Her voice carried no heat, which made it more precise than heat would have allowed. You brought her here, Cecily said. Tonight. Not a question, an accounting. Gene Whitley placed his hand on Bram's arm. I watched it happen from across the room, the careful, hesitant gesture of a man who has spent years choosing silence and is now too late, choosing differently. Bram, Gene said, sit down. 4 words. The first 4 direct words I had ever heard Gene say to his son in 6 years of dinners. Bram did not sit down. Gloria Whitley did not speak. She placed both hands flat on the table in front of her and looked at the surface between them, and that was all. And it was enough to tell me everything I already knew about why none of this had been stopped earlier. Vivian Cross stepped away from table 2. She had been standing since Dessa spoke. I registered her movement in my peripheral vision, the deliberate way she positioned herself in the open space between the tables. 3 feet from where Bram was standing. She waited until the room's attention had settled before she spoke, and she spoke loudly enough for all 35 people to hear each word. You just told your wife that you don't love her, Vivian said. At her anniversary, in front of 35 people. And you brought the woman you've been sleeping with to watch it happen. A pause 2 beats clean and unhurried. I want to make sure you understand exactly what you've done." The silence that followed was heavier than any sound the room had made all evening. The playlist had moved into a new track, a quiet piano piece, moving through the space without anyone listening to it. I set my wine glass down. I want to be precise about this part, the order of each action, because the order is what made it mean what it meant. I set the glass down first without hurry, the way I set down equipment I am finished using. Then I stood. Then I looked at Bram, not through any hope or any remaining question, but with the specific clarity of a person who has just had the last uncertain thing made certain. I looked at Dessa. I understood the full shape of it now, all of it arranged in front of me like a photograph that had finally come into focus. There was nothing left to interpret. I reached beneath my chair and picked up the sealed envelope I had placed there when I arrived, delivered by Ellen Marsh's office to the Cordell that afternoon as arranged, left under my seat by the venue coordinator before the first guest arrived. I crossed the distance from table 4 to table 7 in 9 steps. I placed the envelope on the table directly in front of Bram. "Thank you for your honesty," I said. I took my coat from the back of my chair. I did not rush. I walked to the side exit, the same door I had come in through at 6 o'clock. The door on the adjacent street that I had located on the day I first walked the venue 2 months earlier, because I always identified the exits before I identified anything else in a space. I pushed it open. The October air came in cold and clean with the faint trace of dry leaves from somewhere down the block. The street was quiet, a parked car, the sound of the city a half distance away, the particular stillness of a side street on a Sunday night. I did not look back. I sat in my car for 7 minutes before I did anything else. The engine was off. The dashboard clock read 9:03 p.m. I sat with my hands resting in my lap, not on the wheel, just in my lap the way you hold your hands when you are not yet sure what to do with them. Inside the Cordell, the envelope was sitting on the table in front of Bram Whitley. I did not know if he had opened it yet. I did not know what the room sounded like without me in it. I knew what the envelope contained: the notice of filing for the complaint of divorce, the TRO already served, Ellen Marsh's office information at the bottom of the cover page, and I knew that Bram would understand every word of it the moment he read it, and that there was nothing in those words that required me to be present to explain. The dashboard clock moved to 9:04. I started the engine. 7 minutes. That was how long I sat in the parking space on the side street before I started the engine. The dashboard clock, the October dark pressing against the windows, my hands resting in my lap, not on the wheel, just in my lap the way you hold your hands when you are not yet certain what to do with them next. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that, not because crying would have been wrong, but because it was not what was happening. What was happening was something quieter than grief and more specific than relief. I was sitting with the particular weight of a thing that has finally been said out loud after a very long time of being known but unspoken. And what I was learning in those 7 minutes was that the weight of it was not what I had expected. It was lighter. Not lighter, there is a difference. I was not thinking about what Bram had said. I had known what Bram thought of me for long enough that hearing it announced in a room of 35 people was not a revelation. It was a confirmation of something I had been carrying in the back of my understanding for years, the way you carry a fact you have not yet decided what to do with. He had said it out loud. That was all. The words themselves had not created the situation. They had simply made it visible. What I was thinking about was Gene. I was thinking about his face, the specific expression on Gene Whitley's face in the moment Bram stood up from his chair. I had been watching from table 4, and I had seen it, not shock, not horror, but recognition. The careful, exhausted recognition of a person who has known something for a long time and has just watched it arrive at the place it was always going to arrive at. He had known his son. He had known at some level that mattered what Bram was capable of in a room where he felt cornered. And he had chosen for 6 years of dinners and nods and downcast eyes to let that knowledge sit quietly in its corner. And then he had said 4 words. Bram, sit down. I understood that it was not nothing. I also understood that it was not enough, and that those 2 things could both be true at the same time, and that I did not need to resolve them tonight. My grandmother's saying came back to me in the dark of the car. The truth doesn't ask permission, it just arrives. I had thought I understood it when she said it to me, a warning or a preparation. Sitting in the October dark outside the Cordell, I understood a second layer of it. The truth had arrived. It had not destroyed me. It had simply confirmed what I already knew and given me the one thing I had been waiting for without fully naming the last reason I needed to stop waiting and go. My phone rang at 9:09 Rue. "Where are you?" she said. "Are you okay?" "I'm in the car. I'm coming to you. Tell me what happened after I left." A brief pause, the kind Rue used when she was deciding how to compress information without losing anything important. She had stayed in the room. She told me she had moved to the wall near the exit after I walked out because she wanted to see what happened next and she did not want to be in the middle of it. Vivienne had remained standing for several minutes after she spoke, not aggressive, just present in the way that a person who has said an accurate thing does not need to say anything more. Cecily had stayed seated in the chair she had pulled back, which meant she had not returned to her original position, which meant the physical fact of her standing was still visible in the room even after she was sitting again. Most of the guests had stayed quiet. A few had begun gathering their things. Jean had reached for Bram's arm a second time, and that time Bram had sat down. Gloria had not spoken. She had placed a napkin on the table and pressed her hands over it the way a person presses down on something to keep it still. Bram had opened the envelope. Rue watched him do it. She was close enough to see his hands, and she told me his hands had been steady until he read the first page, and then they were not. He had set the pages on the table in front of him and looked at them for a long moment without moving. Jean had leaned over to read. Neither of them spoke. Dessa Holt had left within 5 minutes of my exit. She had not said anything to Bram. She had taken her bag, spoken briefly to the woman she had arrived with, and walked out through the main entrance. Bram had watched her go. He had not called after her. By 9:20, the room had largely cleared, not abruptly, but steadily. The way a space empties when people understand that the reason they came has resolved itself and there is nothing more to stay for. Rue was one of the last to leave. "How are you doing?" she asked me when she had finished. "I'm driving," I said. "I'll be there in a few minutes." My phone rang again at 9:38 when I was already inside Rue's apartment, sitting on her couch with my coat still on. The name on the screen was Gene Whitley. I picked up. "Lena," he said. "Uncle Gene." I had called him that for 6 years. I did not think about whether that would change. A silence. Long enough that I could hear the ambient sound of wherever he was, a parking lot, I thought, or an outdoor space. He was not in the restaurant. "The envelope," he said. "I saw what was inside." "I know. I'm sorry." His voice carried the specific weight of a man who has not said that word in the direction it needed to go for a very long time. "I should have—" "Yes," I said, "you should have." Another silence. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Forward," I said. I ended the call. Gently, I want to be clear about that too. Not sharply, not with anger. I simply ended it. The way you close a door behind you when you are leaving a place you do not intend to return to right away. There would be time later for more words with Gene Whitley. There were things he deserved to understand and things I might eventually be willing to say. But not tonight. Tonight I had done the thing that needed doing, and that was enough. I started the engine at 9:11. I drove the 11 minutes to Rue's apartment in Belmont through the October Nashville dark. And somewhere in those 11 minutes, I realized I had stopped thinking about what I was leaving behind. What I was thinking about instead was something Rue told me later that same evening, something Bram had done not after I walked out, but while I was still in the room, while the anniversary playlist was still running. Rue Flanagan had a kitchen table she had bought at a flea market on Nolansville Road 4 years earlier and refinished herself over a single weekend with sandpaper and 2 coats of walnut stain paint. It was not perfect. One corner had a slight unevenness where the original wood had resisted the sanding, but it was solid and it was exactly the right surface for a night like this one. She opened the door before I reached the top of the stairs. She did not say anything. She put the kettle on. She set 2 mugs on the counter and sat down across from me at the imperfect, solid table. And that was the whole of what 8 years of friendship looked like in that moment: a kettle, 2 mugs, and someone who knew that what I needed was not to be asked how I was doing. I had 47 missed calls and messages. I scrolled through them at the table while Rue made the tea, reading without responding, the way you read a situation before you decide what to do with it. Bram had called 6 times and sent 3 text messages. Jean had called twice and texted once. Gloria had sent 2 messages. I did not open them. Vivian Cross had sent a single text. "You were extraordinary tonight. Call me when you're ready." Otto Brannigan had sent a message that read, "Your mail's been piling up. No rush." A number I recognized as Bram's cousin had texted once, a short message I skimmed and did not read fully. And there was one voice message from my Aunt Vera. Vera was my father's younger sister, the only person in my family who had met Bram more than once and had never, in 6 years, said a word about what she thought of him. I had always assumed that was politeness. I understood now that it was something closer to patience. She had watched my life from a careful distance and had, as far as I could tell, known things about the people in it before I did, and had said very little. She had met Bram 3 times over the course of our marriage. She had never said anything critical. She had never said anything particularly warm either. She had simply looked the way certain people look when they are gathering information they are not ready to use. I played the message with the phone held close, not on speaker. Her voice was the same as it always was, even unhurried, without the softening that people sometimes put into their voices when they are delivering something difficult. "Lena, I'm not calling to tell you to go back. I need you to know that whatever he said tonight is not the truth. It never was. I've known what kind of man he is for a long time. And I should have said something earlier. I'm sorry I didn't. Call me when you're ready, not before." I played it again. Then I set the phone face down on the table and left it there. Rue put a mug in front of me. She sat down. We drank tea in silence for several minutes, which was not uncomfortable. It was the specific silence of 2 people who do not need to fill space with words in order to be present in it. Bram's messages arrived in a pattern I recognized without needing to analyze, controlled, at first, then pressurized. The 11:52 p.m. text read, "We need to talk. Call me." The one that came in after midnight, I saw it when I scrolled back through the notification list, read, "That envelope. What is this? Call me now." I looked at that last word for a moment. Capital letters. Still giving instructions at 1 a.m, still expecting me to arrange myself around what he needed. I set the phone face down again. "Are you okay?" Rue asked. I thought about the question before I answered it, not performing the thinking, actually thinking, in the way I had not always allowed myself to do. When the answer required me to say something I was not yet prepared to admit. "I think I'll be okay," I said, "but not yet." That's the most honest thing you've said in a while. I know. I sat with that for a moment. And then I said the thing I had been working toward without quite knowing it. The thing that had been sitting at the edge of my understanding for the 11-minute drive through the Nashville dark. I knew earlier than I admitted to myself, I said. What he was. I knew it before the gallery, before Camille, maybe before the second year. I wrapped both hands around the mug. I stayed because leaving would have meant admitting that I had been wrong for longer than I wanted to count. I kept adjusting, kept reducing myself, kept waiting for the man from the first 3 months to come back, and some part of me knew that man was never coming back, and I stayed anyway. I paused. That part is mine. I own it completely. Rue did not tell me I was wrong. She did not tell me I was being too hard on myself. She simply nodded the kind of nod that means, I hear you, rather than I agree or I disagree, and refilled my mug from the pot on the table. There's something else you should know, she said, about tonight, about what Bram did while you were still at the party. I looked at her. Tell me. She set the pot down carefully. Thad found me before he left the venue. Thad had been at the bar most of the evening near the side exit, he said, because the noise inside made it hard to hear, and he was waiting on a call of his own. At some point around 8:30, he stepped into the hallway near the side door to check his phone, and that was when he saw Bram. Standing just outside the exit phone, pressed close voice low but not low enough. Thad caught pieces of it, a name he didn't recognize, a number, and the word transfer. Not the full conversation, but he was close enough to catch pieces of it. She paused. A name he didn't recognize, a number, and the word transfer. Thad remembered all of that. He wrote it down on the back of his parking stub before he left the building. Rue looked at me steadily. He didn't know what it meant, but he thought you should know he heard it. I turned the mug in my hands. The tea had cooled to the temperature I actually wanted, not too hot to drink, not cold enough to be forgotten. I drank it. Whatever Bram had done tonight, and I had a clear enough picture of its shape, even without the specific numbers, I would know in full by morning. Ellen Marsh would call. She always did when something had moved. I placed the phone face down on Rue's imperfect solid table. Outside, Nashville was doing what it always did, indifferent continuously. Entirely unaware of the woman sitting at a kitchen table in Belmont, learning how to hold her hand still again. She'll call me, I said mostly to myself. Rue nodded. Then sleep. I did. She called at 8:41 in the morning. I was still at Rue's. The tea was still warm. My attorney called at 8:41 in the morning on October 15th. I was still at Rue's apartment. The tea in my hand was still warm, I noticed that specifically, because it had been a long time since I had been able to hold something at the temperature I wanted, without having to set it down before it was finished. I answered on the second ring. Lena, Ellen said, I need you to be sitting down for this one. I'm sitting down. Good. Here's what happened. At 8:32 p.m. on October 14th, while I was standing at table 4 in the Cordell, while the anniversary playlist was still running, while Bram Whitley was still at table 7 with his jacket buttoned and his wine untouched, a wire transfer was initiated from the joint checking account that carried both our names. The amount was $95,000. The destination was a business checking account registered to a limited liability company that Ellen's office had not yet been able to fully identify. The LLC had been incorporated in Delaware, which has some of the most opaque corporate registration laws in the country, and tracing the beneficial owner would require a formal discovery request. The transfer went through. I need to be clear about that because I think people assume that a restraining order works like a lock on a bank vault, that the moment the court issues the order, every account freezes automatically. That is not how it works. A temporary restraining order is a directive to a person, not a command to a financial institution. It tells Bram that he may not transfer, conceal, or dispose of marital assets. It does not tell the bank anything unless the bank has been separately notified. Our bank had not been separately notified. The transfer cleared. What the bank did do was flag the transaction as unusual, a large wire transfer on a Sunday evening to an unfamiliar business account, from a joint account that had not previously made transfers of that size. The bank's compliance department noted it and held the report. When Ellen's office opened at 8 that morning, they had already received an automated alert through the court's electronic notification system, which had been monitoring activity on accounts listed in the TRO filing. Ellen had the transaction record before I was awake. He knew about the TRO, she said. It was served 36 hours before he made that transfer. He either ignored his attorney's advice or he didn't have time to get advice and panicked. Either way, he executed a transaction in direct violation of a court order that he had been personally served with. A pause. The specific pause of someone letting a fact settle before adding to it. This morning, I filed an emergency motion for return of marital funds with Davidson County Circuit Court. The motion requests that the court issue an immediate order to the receiving bank, requiring them to freeze the destination account and return the full amount within 72 hours. I also filed a motion for contempt of court, Sindalp. What does contempt mean here, practically? It means Bram Whitley violated a direct order from a judge. Civil contempt in a divorce proceeding can result in fines, mandatory return of the assets, and in cases where the violation is willful, which this clearly is, the court has the authority to order him held until he complies. Criminal contempt is also on the table if the DA's office decides to pursue it independently. He has handed us a significant additional cause of action on top of the divorce itself. I sat with that for a moment. He did this at 8:32, I said, while I was still at the party. Yes. While the music was still playing. Yes. I looked across at Rue, who was sitting on the other side of the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around her own mug, watching me with the specific attention of someone who has decided to let a conversation finish before asking anything about it. He thought I would fall apart, I said. Not to Ellen, mostly to the room. That was the plan. Say what he said in front of 35 people. Make sure I spent the next 48 hours too destabilized to check my accounts or call anyone who mattered. Clear the joint account while I was still processing what had happened in that room. That appears to be correct, Ellen said. He didn't know I'd already filed. He knew about the TRO. He did not know the full extent of what had been prepared. There's a difference between knowing a document exists and understanding what it means for every account, every asset, every move he makes from here on out. What happens next? The court will review the emergency motion today or tomorrow. Given the clear paper trail, the TRO service date, the transaction timestamp, the wire record, I expect the emergency order to be granted quickly. Once it is, the receiving bank has 72 hours to freeze and return the funds. We will also be pursuing formal discovery on the LLC to identify where that entity came from and who controls it. She paused again. There is one more thing. We may find in discovery that this was not the first time he moved money in ways that were not disclosed to you. I did not say anything for a moment. Proceed with everything, I said. That's what I needed to hear. After I hung up, I told Rue what Ellen had said, the transaction amount, the timing, the emergency motion, the contempt filing. Rue listened without interrupting, the way she always listened when the facts were serious enough to deserve her full attention. He planned the whole thing, she said when I finished. What he said, all of it. Yes, and it still didn't work. No, it didn't. Bram had spent 6 years trying to manage me. He had spent one evening trying to destroy me. He had done both while I was already 3 steps ahead of him, because when you have spent 6 years watching someone very carefully, you learn exactly how they move. You learn what they reach for when they feel cornered. You learn the difference between the things they do deliberately and the things they do because fear has taken the wheel and they have forgotten that someone else in the room has been paying attention. I had been paying attention for a very long time. That was October 15th. I left Nashville on a Saturday morning in early November with 2 boxes in the trunk and a lease signed on a north-facing apartment on Larimer Street. The drive to Denver took 2 days. I stopped once in a small town in western Kansas and ate breakfast at a counter facing the window while the sun came up over flat land that went on longer than I could see. October 15th had given me everything I needed to move forward. What I did not yet know was that the envelope waiting for me in Denver would change the shape of the case entirely. I left Nashville on a Saturday morning in early November. The trees along the interstate were at peak color gold and copper, and a particular shade of deep red that Nashville does better than anywhere I have been. I drove alone, with 2 boxes in the trunk and a camera bag on the passenger seat, because even in transition, I did not know how to travel without something to see through. I did not take any photographs that morning. I looked at the light directly without framing it, which was something I did not do often enough. The drive was 18 hours across 2 days. I stopped in Amarillo, Texas, and slept at a chain motel with a parking lot that faced west, which meant the room was full of late afternoon light when I checked in dark within an hour. I ate at the counter of a diner nearby and did not speak to anyone except the woman who refilled my coffee. I did not feel lonely. I felt more than anything like a person who had arrived at the part of the journey that required no decisions, only distance. The apartment on Larimer Street was exactly as the listing photographs had shown it. North-facing windows, wood floors, a kitchen that got morning light from the east. There were no furnishings beyond what I had arranged to be delivered in advance: a bed, a small table, 2 chairs. The boxes I brought in from the car lined the east wall of the main room. I stood in the center of the apartment and looked at all of it for a moment. It was enough. That was what I thought, standing there with the Denver November light coming through the north windows, flat and even and familiar. This is enough to begin with. Harlow and Associates had asked me to come in early. The formal contract started January 1st. But the studio's creative director had suggested I come to Denver in November for an extended onboarding period, with the first campaign assignment beginning immediately on a freelance basis. The first project would count against the contract's initial deliverables. It was a common arrangement in commercial studios. It suited me exactly. I met Ingrid Sable on a Monday morning in my first week. She was the studio's lead creative director, a woman in her mid-40s, with the particular quality of attention that belongs to people who have been editing other people's work for long enough that they have learned to see past the surface of a thing immediately. She shook my hand in the studio's main space, looked at the portfolio I had brought, and did not say anything for approximately 40 seconds. Then she said, "Good. Let's talk about the first assignment." The project was an editorial campaign for a large outdoor equipment brand, 3 months full creative direction, $89,000. She walked me through the brief with the directness of someone who had no interest in decorating information she was going to deliver anyway. Then she said, "I heard about the Ashford campaign, the one in Nashville that fell through." I looked at her. "What did you hear?" "A mutual contact in the industry mentioned it. Someone contacted Camille Ashford before your consultation, not after, before, and raised questions about your professional stability. Raised them in the particular way that leaves no clear record, but creates the exact kind of uncertainty that makes a client pull back before they have fully committed." She paused. "This person did the same thing with at least 2 agencies in Nashville over the past 3 years. I want you to know that I know this, because I did not hire you without looking into the shape of what happened." I did not need to ask who she meant. I had known for a long time in the way I had known many things before I was ready to name them. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "It won't happen here," Ingrid said. "The work will speak for itself. It always does eventually." The following week, a former colleague called from Nashville. She had worked as a retoucher for my studio during a period 2 years earlier, a careful, detail-oriented woman who had always done her work well and asked nothing beyond what was reasonable. She had heard I had left Nashville and said she'd been sitting with something she should have told me sooner. Bram had made contact over the course of roughly 3 years with creative directors and project leads at several larger agencies in Nashville. Not through formal channels, informally at industry events through shared contacts in the margins of the professional world, where two people who have a reason to know each other find themselves in the same room. He had not said anything directly negative about my work. He had asked questions, small, specific, carefully worded questions. "Have you found her easy to work with? She tends to take on more than she can manage. Have you noticed that I worry about her sometimes?" Questions that left no evidence, produced no record, and did the specific damage that questions do when they are asked by someone who sounds like he has a reason to be concerned. She believed he had cost me at least 4 significant contracts over 3 years. She had put the pieces together only recently, after hearing from a contact who had been on the receiving end of one of those conversations, and she had felt, she said, that I deserved to know. I thanked her. I told her I was glad she called. I meant both things. After I hung up, I stood at the north window on Larimer Street and looked at the Rhino District in the November morning light. It was nothing like Nashville. The architecture was different. The scale was different. The particular quality of the air at a mile above sea level was something I was still adjusting to, a slight thinness that I noticed most in the first 10 minutes after waking. I had not yet learned this city's rhythms. I did not need to have learned them yet. I thought about 4 contracts I had lost without knowing I had lost them. I thought about what I had built anyway, the accounts I had held, the referrals that had come through, the portfolio that was sitting in Ingrid Sable's studio right now with her notes in the margin. I had built a career worth leaving Nashville for in spite of what had been taken from it without my knowledge. I chose to keep the pride in that, not in spite of what Bram had done, in addition to it. 3 weeks after I arrived, a padded envelope appeared at the Larimer Street address forwarded by Rue from the Germantown house. My name was printed on the label. The return address in the upper left corner read, First Tennessee Bank Mortgage Services Division. Inside was a statement. A home equity line of credit opened 14 months earlier against the Germantown property in an amount I had never discussed, never approved, never signed for. Except there was a signature on the document, in the space where my name was supposed to go. It was not my signature. $180,000. That was the number on the home equity loan statement from First Tennessee Bank, a loan drawn against the Germantown property 14 months ago, signed according to the documents by both Lena and Bram Whitley. I had never signed anything. I sat at the kitchen table in my Denver apartment and read the statement twice, then a third time. The way you reread something, not because you misunderstood it, but because you want to be certain you understood it exactly right. The loan amount, the date, the property address, my name, printed cleanly above a signature that curved in all the right places and was not mine. I had signed my name that week on a freelance contract with Harlow and Associates, on my lease renewal for the Larimer Street apartment, on the divorce petition Ellen had filed in Davidson County Circuit Court. Every one of those signatures was a choice I had made with full knowledge of what I was agreeing to. This one was not. I called Ellen at 8:17 in the morning. She had already pulled the file. Her voice when she answered carried the particular steadiness of someone who has looked at something difficult long enough to stop being surprised by it. The notarization is the mechanism, she said. Bram used a remote online notarization service, RON, Tennessee authorized RON platforms beginning in 2020. The process allows document signing via live video session with a certified notary. No in-person appearance required. The notary verifies identity through uploaded ID images and a real-time screen recording. I understood immediately. He had my ID. He had copies of your passport and driver's license standard practice in a marriage access to joint files. He used those images to pass the identity check. The session was recorded, but the recording shows someone off-screen verbally confirming details while a cursor moves. The notary logged it as compliant. A pause. The $180,000 moved into a personal account under Bram's name within 72 hours. Based on the transaction history, the funds were spent incrementally over 9 months, the last withdrawal in June 2024. June 2024, the same month he had attended the Camille Ashford consultation. The same month the $67,000 contract fell through. What are the charges? I asked. Forgery of a financial instrument. Ellen said. Class C felony under Tennessee Criminal Code. Because First Tennessee is FDIC insured, the forgery also triggers federal bank fraud statutes. We are no longer talking about divorce court, Lana. We are talking about criminal exposure. My office filed a referral with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation this morning and notified First Tennessee's Fraud Division directly. She let that settle for a moment. Combined with the contempt motion from the $95,000 transfer, the one he executed while the TRO was active, Bram is looking at compounding criminal liability. I wrote in my notebook, RON, Class C felony, federal bank fraud, TBI referral, 8:17 a.m. Rue called 40 minutes later. She had seen Ellen's message. How are you? She asked. I thought about the question. Not surprised, I said, and that's the part that actually makes me sad. A brief silence on her end. Yeah, Rue said. That's exactly right. That was all. It was enough. Gene Whitley called at 10:44 in the morning. I almost let it go to voicemail. I answered on the 4th ring. Lena. His voice had changed, not softer exactly, but compressed, like something structural had shifted beneath the surface. The loan. Bram told me he said the two of you had agreed to borrow against the house for your studio expansion. He said you didn't want to tell us because you felt uncomfortable asking for help that way. I sat very still. He said it was your idea, Jean continued, that you were embarrassed about the finances and asked him to handle the paperwork. The particular precision of that lie, the way it used my actual character, my actual reluctance to ask for things to make itself believable, was almost impressive. Almost. I know you believed him, Jean. Lord. The word came out flat and raw. I had no idea it was I know, you didn't know the signature was forged. That doesn't excuse what No, I said. It doesn't. But it's a different thing, and those are two different conversations. A long silence. I'm sorry, Lena. I know you are, I said. I ended the call gently. Not with anger. With something closer to exhaustion, the specific kind that comes not from effort, but from finally being done, pretending that something complicated is simple. Gloria called 11 minutes later. She was crying before I said a word. She told me Bram was not the person she had believed him to be. She told me she was sorry. She told me she didn't know what to do with any of this. I listened until she stopped. Then I said quietly, I know, I lived with him for 6 years. There was nothing left to add after that. Bram's attorney sent a settlement proposal at 2:15 in the afternoon, a number generous enough to suggest his legal team understood the severity of what he was facing. A mutual release of liability, a request that I withdraw the TBI referral and decline to cooperate with the federal fraud investigation. I read the email once. I typed 4 words in reply to Ellen. Let them see everything. She called me back in 3 minutes. You're certain? Let the court see everything I said, every transaction, every withdrawal, the RON session recording, the IP address, the timeline, Jean's statement, all of it. Understood. Her voice carried something measured and exact. I should tell you, under Tennessee fault-based divorce grounds with documented financial fraud and evidence of marital misconduct, the court has the authority to divide assets in a manner that departs significantly from an equal split. You are in an exceptionally strong position, as long as you are willing to let the process run its course. I am willing, I said. Then we proceed. I set my phone face down on the table. I picked up my coffee. It was still hot. I had made a fresh cup after Jean's call, and for the first time in longer than I could accurately remember, I had drunk it at the right temperature. December was coming. The legal process would move the way legal processes move, slowly at first, then faster than anyone expects. That was a different story for a different chapter. What I wanted to remember about that particular Tuesday in November was smaller than any of that. It was the cup in my hands, the light through the window on Larimer Street. The fact that I had read a document bearing my forged signature, made 4 phone calls, refused a settlement, and authorized a full legal disclosure all before noon. And that when I finally sat down, the coffee was still warm. I had chosen that too. I made a cup of coffee on a Tuesday morning in November and finished it before it went cold. It was a small thing. I knew it was a small thing, but I had not done it in 6 years, made coffee, stood at a window, and let it stay hot all the way to the last sip. For 6 years, there had always been something that needed handling first. A schedule to confirm, a message to answer, a silence to interpret. The coffee sat on the counter while I managed everything around it, and by the time I remembered it was there, it was already gone cold, and I drank it anyway, because there was no reason not to. On a Tuesday morning in November in a second-floor apartment on Larimer Street in Denver's Rhino Arts District, I stood at the north-facing window and drank my coffee while it was still hot. Every sip, all the way to the end. The light in Denver at that hour was gray and flat, and even the particular quality of northern morning light that photographers spend years chasing, the kind that does not flatter or distort, that simply shows you what is actually there. I had noticed it the first week I arrived and thought, this is the right kind of light for starting over. Below on Larimer Street, the coffee shop on the corner was unlocking its door. A man walked past with a small dog in a yellow rain jacket. The same man, the same dog. The same yellow jacket I had seen every morning since I moved in. He never looked up. The city was beginning its day without consulting me about what I needed to do first. The apartment was not fully unpacked. Boxes still lined the far wall. Books were stacked in waiting columns beside an empty shelf. There was one chair at the kitchen table where there should have been 2, and I had not gotten around to buying a second one because it had not occurred to me that I needed to. Enough, I thought, looking at all of it. For right now, this is enough. My phone screen lit up on the counter, a message from Rue. How's Denver? I looked at the street below, at the light moving between the buildings. I thought about the people I had not yet met, the work I had not yet done, the mornings I had not yet had. I thought about how strange it was to stand in a city that did not know my history and feel for the first time in longer than I could measure entirely like myself. Quiet, I typed back. I like it. I set the phone down without waiting for her reply. Ingrid called at 9:15. She had that precise morning energy I had come to recognize, not hurried, but fully present. The kind of focus that gets things decided before most people have finished their first meeting. The outdoor campaign feedback is back, she said. The client called it the best environmental work they've seen from an independent photographer in 3 years. They're asking about your schedule for next year. What are they thinking? 3 campaigns, possibly 4. They want continuity, the same eye across the whole year. A pause. We're going to need you for a while, Lena. I thought about that word continuity. In another version of my life, it would have made me think of obligation, of being needed in the way that hollows you out rather than fills you up. Here it meant something different. Here it meant I had made something worth continuing. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. After I hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a moment. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt like an answer rather than an absence. I rinsed my coffee cup and placed it on the shelf above the sink, clean upright in the exact spot I had decided it would live when I first moved in. Then I went to the closet shelf where I kept my camera, the Fujifilm medium format. I had bought it with the check from my first real commercial contract, a regional magazine feature, not large by any measure, but mine entirely. I had carried it through every significant shoot since then. It had been in the Germantown house for 6 years, and it had never once stopped being mine. I put on my jacket, went down the stairs, pushed open the door to Larimer Street. The cold came first, that clean, high-altitude cold that wakes you up without being cruel about it. The light was everywhere low, and even no shadows yet. The city was moving. A delivery driver unloading boxes, 2 women talking outside the coffee shop, a cyclist navigating the far lane. Real things happening in real time, none of it waiting for me to approve it. I turned at the corner, raised the camera, looked through the viewfinder. The frame settled the street, the light, the city in motion. No name I was managing, no call I was bracing for. Nothing that needed to be handled before I could be here. Just the frame, and the light and the exact moment I was standing in. I pressed the shutter. The sound it made was small. A single clean click, the way a door sounds when it closes properly, not slammed, not left ajar, but shut with the particular finality of something that fits exactly right. For the first time in 6 years, the only thing inside the frame was exactly what I had chosen to see. Someone once told me that God doesn't close a door without opening a window. What they forgot to mention is the hallway, the long, quiet hallway, where you stand alone, wondering if you misread everything. This was my story. A story of family betrayal that never arrived loudly. It came in cold coffee-interrupted sentences and a signature I never gave. If you are somewhere in the middle of your own version of this, don't wait 6 years. Family betrayal rarely looks like a villain. It looks like someone saying, "I just want what's best for you," while quietly closing every window you had. My honest belief leaving is not weakness. Silence is not loyalty. Family revenge was never my goal a Tuesday morning with hot coffee in a frame, holding only what I chose was, because chasing family revenge costs you the very peace you were fighting for. And behind every story of family betrayal is someone who loved too quietly for too long. Don't be like me. Speak sooner. Choose yourself earlier. If this stayed with you, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs it and stay with us for what comes next. Thank you truly for staying until the very last word. Heads up, upcoming stories contain fictional elements built with purpose. If that's not for you, no judgment. Step away. But if you're staying, something is coming.
Alright, that's it for this one. I appreciate you watching. I'll see you next time.